Hey guys, welcome to Chapter 9, Section 5. This is going to be a little summary of solving quadratic equations. We've actually learned quite a few methods for solving quadratic equations, and we just want to pause to make sure we understand all of those. So the first the first method is called factoring. We actually learned this back in Chapter 7. We can use this factoring technique when we have an expression that's actually factorable. And the exception here is not all expressions are factorable. But here's an example. We got x squared plus 7x plus 12. And this is the case where we're looking for factors of 12 that combine to be positive 7. And that's 3 and 4. So our factor is x plus 3 and x plus 4. Remind us that to find our zeros or our solutions, we take each factor, set it equal to 0, and solve. So our two solutions here would be x equals negative 3 and x equals negative 4. The next method we learned was a pretty simple one. All we needed to do was graph a quadratic equation, and we could tell where the solutions were because they were found at the x-intercepts. So a simple example here, we've got the graph of x squared plus 5x minus 2. If we go over to Desmos here and we graph that, you can see that our two solutions are at the x-intercepts, negative 5.4 and 0.4. All right, following that method, and that method was given to us in section 9.2, following that method from section 9.3 was using square roots. Now, square roots could only be done if you did not have that linear term. In other words, there was no x term in our quadratic. All right, so if there's no x term, there's just an x squared term and a constant term, then you can use the idea of square roots. So here's an example over here. We got 2x squared minus 6 equals 26. We're going to add 6 to both sides. That gives us 2x squared equals 32. Divide off the 2, and you are left with x squared equals 16. Now taking the square root of both of those two sides gives you two solutions, both a positive and negative value of 4. All right, then following that, we had two difficult techniques for finding the solutions to a quadratic equation. One of those was called completing the square, and the other one was the quadratic formula. So we're going to review those two techniques down here with some of the examples that we've been given. All right, for this first one here, we have x squared minus 4x minus 7 equals 0. We are going to use our completing the square technique here. So we're going to complete that square. If you remember, our first step was to get just the x squared and the bx term by themselves. So we write x squared minus 4x, and I'm going to write plus 0, and with my equal sign. Now I'm going to take that negative 7, remember, and I'm going to bump it over to the right-hand side by addition. So we added 7 there, but we also need to add whatever it is that we add to this side to complete that square. So completing the square, we took half of that b term, which is negative 4. So half of negative 4 is negative 2, and negative 2 squared is positive 4. So I'm adding 4 to the left side. I need to add 4 to the right side as well. Now this was done so that we could write this as the square of the binomial x minus 2. So x minus 2 squared is equal to 11. Now we can go from here and we can solve this quadratic equation. We do that by taking the square root of both sides. So I have the two equations, x minus 2 equals the positive square root of 11. And I have x minus 2 equals the negative square root of 11. All right, our final step then is to add 2 to each of these sides here. I'm going to add 2 there. And then use my calculator to find out what those solutions will be. So we can do that by taking the square root of positive 11 and adding 2 to that. So one of our solutions should be 5.31. And then we will take the opposite of the square root of 11. Oops. The opposite of the square root of 11 and add 2 to that. When we do that, we end up with negative 1.3 and positive 5.3. We could also go ahead and check that on Desmos by graphing that original equation. Here's our original equation, x squared minus 4x minus 7, and you can see the two x-intercepts are negative 1.3 and positive 5.3. So we'll write down our two solutions here. X is equal to 5.3 and negative, what did we say it was, 1.3. All right, let's go on to our next example. And our next example here, we're actually going to skip over part B and we're going to go down to part C. And now we're going to practice our quadratic formula. All right. So in our quadratic formula, remember it's good to start off with your A, your B, and your C. Your A value here is positive 10, B is positive 7, and C is negative 12. And I'm just going to write our little formula here for a quadratic formula. And it's found, see it's not found on this paper, so I'm going to write it again. We have the opposite of b plus or minus that square root of b squared minus 4ac. And this is all being divided by 2a. So let's substitute in our values here. The opposite of 7 is negative 7 plus or minus the square root. Now remember, we're going to put our b value there, which is 7, not 4, into parentheses. So that's 7 squared minus 4 times our 10 times our c value here, which is negative 12. And then we are going to divide that all by 2 times our a value, which is 10. All right, little reminder here when it comes to the graphing calculator, make sure you start off with parentheses to indicate this numerator, and then end that numerator with parentheses, and then again in the denominator have some parentheses. So let's get a little practice doing that. We'll plug that into our graphing calculator. We're going to start off with an open set of parentheses and say the opposite of 7, and we're just going to do the positive version, and we have 7 squared minus your 4 times your a value, which we said was 10, times your c value, which is negative 12. Notice that's all under the parentheses. Now we're going to arrow outside that parentheses and close up our numerator, and then divide that by, we're going to open another set of parentheses, and 2 times our a value of 10. Okay, close that and press enter. So one of our solutions is 0.8. Now to get that line back down there using our graphing calculator, we'll hit second function, enter, and we are now going to arrow all the way back here, and we're going to change this positive sign here to minus, and we'll hit enter again. So here's our other one, negative 1.5. So 0.8 and negative 1.5, and let's just convert that using Desmos to graph that, and there they are. Negative 1.5 and 0.8 are our x-intercepts. So using our quadratic formula, we get our two solutions. X is equal to negative 1.5 and 0.8.